Okay, now that we know that the add-in seems to be making the hooks correctly, let's go ahead and do something about removing this and putting in an actual calendar. In order to do this, I need a user form for the calendar, and I'm going to need to go out and find that calendar. Let's do both of those right now. First of all, in Project, I'm going to add a user form. There's the form. I'll make it just a little bit bigger. Now, what I'd like to do is grab some ActiveX control from the, this is the control box here, and find a calendar. Calendar's not listed there, though. What you can do is go into Project Components and find a component that should be installed in Windows already. That's the Microsoft Calendar control. Let's see if we can find it in here. There we go, Microsoft Calendar control. I'll go ahead and add that to the current project, and it should show up. Oh, where did it go? There we go. It shows up right here. There's the calendar control. I'll go ahead and click on this, and then click and deposit my calendar right there. Now, in this calendar, there's going to be a couple of things that happen. First of all, when you do a single click on the calendar objects, on these individual dates in the calendar, we're going to take the start time and end time and store them until we're ready for the second click. Once you have clicked a second time, we know you have a start and end date, and then we're going to go ahead and do a set time range. When we do a set time range, we're going to have to remember to do it relative to whatever the current active display is, and we'll get there through the application object. Now let's add the code to this calendar object so that we can change the dates. I'll double click on this to bring up the code window. Actually, I need some variables. There's going to be a start time and end time variable, but also a variable to count the number of clicks. So I'll dim iNumClicks, stands for an integer that's counting the number of clicks. Dim iNumClicks as a long integer. I will dimension st as a string and also et as a string. These are standing for start time and end time. And at this point, I'm ready to go ahead and start telling the calendar what to do. When the user clicks on the calendar object, I want to store away the start time and end time. But before I do that, I'm going to check to see if this is the first or the second time the user has clicked. So that's why I have an if-then statement that basically says if numClicks is equal to 0, then, in other words, if this is the first time the user has clicked, then we're going to say, okay, let's stuff the start time variable. St is equal to, I'll do a Control J to bring up a list of the objects. There's calendar. Let's see, is that the right object? Calendar, does it have a value? No, that's not the right object. Do a Control J. It's not calendar property, it's the calendar1 object, and we'll look at the value of that. So the st is going to be equal to the value of that calendar, and now we'll set numClicks equal to 1. And we do that so that the second time we click, we're going to take the else portion of the if-then statement. So at this point, if the user has clicked once and numClicks is now equal to 1, the second time through we're going to take the else portion. We'll simply say let's set et equal to calendar1 value. That's the end time. We'll set numClicks back to 0, and after that let's take a look at how we would set the start and end time on the ProcessBook. We're going to need to make sure we use relative references for that. Said we need to make sure we're using relative references. So I'm going to start at the beginning of the object hierarchy, at the ProcessBook object library application level. We want to get the active display and invoke the set time range. Now when we set time range, we're going to set time range to the two variables we chose above, st and et. By making the reference this way, it doesn't matter what displays open. We'll get to any display. And finally, at this point, let's also refresh that display. There's a refresh method that makes sure that the changes we made actually show up on the screen. So that should do it for us. There's only one other thing to add to this. I'd like to add where's my control toolbox here. I need to add a little button to this to unload this form when it's done, or when we're done. So I'll put a button over here, and we'll just call this something like end. We'll look at its properties and call this exit or end, or close. And all this is going to do is there is a me object. Let's see, is this the right way? No, I'm sorry, I've got it wrong way around. An unload method, and we're going to use me. Me is a convention in Visual Basic that refers to the current object in the current workspace. So that should go ahead and unload this when we're finished. Now that the code has been written for the calendar, we need something that will launch this user form and launch this, and therefore launch the calendar. Now the form is called form 1. I can go back to this. This is my Y object, the display object. Let's go to the before double click. Here we're simply going to say, let's go to form 1, and there is a show method. Form 1 show simply launches that user form when this is double clicked. And now we're ready to test this. Now I mentioned earlier it is possible to test while the display is, while you've already got the DLL and you've made reference to it in this add-in manager. Let me show you a nice way that you can test this that actually gives you some nice debugging capabilities. First of all, I unloaded it from ProcessBook. I'm going to go ahead and actually run this from here. If we go ahead and run it, you'll notice that it looks as though nothing is happening. But if we go into ProcessBook, you'll notice that this shows up in the add-in manager. That's even if it had not been compiled yet, it would show up. And at this point, let's go ahead and activate something. Let's double click. And here's our form. Now in testing, I've noticed that this shows up at the bottom. I'm not quite sure why, but let's see if it works. No, it doesn't. Well, this is a good, and I wish I could say intentional way of showing you how nice the debugging is. I forgot to end my if-then statement with an end if. Now, if we had compiled the DLL, we wouldn't have known what was wrong. The being able to run this from within the running version of VB gives us the debug capabilities we really don't have once we build a DLL. So anyway, let me go ahead and fix this. I'll go ahead and exit out of that. Let's fix this with an end if. I'll go ahead and run it again. By the way, you'll notice back in ProcessBook, let's see, is it still listed there? Yeah, it's no longer listed. And when I start this up again, ProcessBook recognizes it as an add-in. There it is, because it's executing right now. Again, it will not start to execute until I do a display activate. There's my display activate. And let's see, did it work? I'm not seeing anything. Nope. Dead in the water here. Well, let's see, what would we do? If I were doing this and had no resources, this is where I'd call tech support. But, oh, I know. Yeah, there we go. I looked at it, I clicked on it, but I forgot to load it. So, again, I wish I could claim that was a clever ruse, but let's see if this works now. There we go. The form appears. The code works this time instead of failing. Well, you can barely tell. There's our little display. Let's see. Is that working? No. Doesn't seem to be working. Let's try it on this display. We can see it a little better. Still nothing. Well, back to the drawing board, but as I said, this is how you could debug it while you're still in Visual Basic without having to create that DLL, in which case your debugging options are going to be limited. The error that I got last time was because of some variable declaration that didn't quite match the use of the variable. Take a look at this. Here's a variable called numclicks. That's what I used when I wrote my code. However, when I defined the variable, I defined it as inumclicks. So if I define it as inumclicks, then I use it as numclicks. Of course, the two don't match. What happens in fact, since I haven't required explicit variable declaration, Visual Basic is doing what it thinks is a favor by generating this in runtime as a variant. Now of course, since it's being generated each time this executes, it's being initialized as well. So this comes back as 0 all day long. I could click all I want and numclicks would always be 0. So what I need to do is fix this. First of all, let me try to make sure this doesn't happen again. I'm going to go ahead and, it's always a good idea to require variable declaration. You can just type that in like that. You can also do this in Tools Options and always choose Require Variable Declaration. If you don't do that already, it's a very good habit to get into. The other thing is, next time I start, I should have started with a full compile, because with a full compile we would have caught that if explicit variable declaration was required. So I've got it in several places. Let me go ahead and fix it in these several places. Now let's go ahead and start again. This time we'll start with a full compile. It doesn't look like there's a problem now, so let's go ahead and test this one more time. Go into the add-in manager, we'll load this add-in. Again, nothing happens until the first time you do a display activate. There's the display activate. You can't see it there, but the form ended up being on the bottom of the screen. I had to bring it to the top. And let's see if this is going to work. I'll go from the 21st to the 22nd, and yes, you can barely see, but what's happened is, as I click from these different displays, or these different dates, we're seeing the dates change there. So it looks to have worked correctly at this point. Now we're ready to go ahead and make that DLL. Now at this point it would seem as though we're all finished. We're ready to just go ahead and make this DLL and then load it and see if it works. And pretty much that's it. There's one more gotcha that I wanted to warn you about. Watch what happens when I test this from here. I'll go ahead and load this. I'll switch from one display to another, and then I'll double click. And we get this error message about non-modal forms. Basically, the way we've implemented it through a DLL is incompatible with the way that form is running. The solution to this is to go back into that before double click, and there's a keyword, and I ignored this before, but in the show method there's the option to either show this modeless or modal, and there's a VB keyword called VB modal that you can use to indicate that this is a modal form. Now by modal and modeless, what we mean is the difference between a form that allows you to go underneath of it, which would be modeless, and a form that kind of sits on top and dominates the screen. Much like a find in Microsoft Word, that's modeless because you can go underneath of it. Well, in this case we're going to have to do a modal form, and let's go ahead and compile this again. We should see this resolves the problem for us. Let's go into the add-in manager, remove it so that I can compile it again. Interesting how that did not show up during the testing, because at that point we were not running it as a DLL. Okay, I've just compiled it. I'll go into Tools, Add-in Manager, add it one more time, activated display, double click, and it looks like here's our big finish, and everything seems to be working. The last thing you should do is make sure that this program kind of cleans up after itself. We did some things during the on connection. During the on disconnection, what I'd like to do is get rid of these objects I created. Set x equal to nothing, set y equal to nothing. It's when you're working with objects, it's a good idea. It frees up memory space taken up by these objects. Technically, Visual Basic is supposed to do this when an application exits, but it doesn't always, well, it doesn't hurt to explicitly do it yourself. Anyway, that's a good sound programming procedure. Now again, at this point it seems like we're ready to just make this DLL and go out and send this DLL around and give it to different users, etc. Except we can't finish we can't stop right there. There's some things that you'll have to do to get that DLL to work. For example, the runtime library from Visual Basic has to be available, etc. So you're going to need some mechanism to give this to people and give them an install. Now I would recommend, unless you've got a better tool licensed, the package and deployment wizard. I don't know if you can see that there, but this package and deployment wizard is part of Microsoft Visual Studio Tools. And what we can do is go out and find the specific file that you're using. In this case, it was test1. It was a Visual Basic project that we're looking for VBP files. And what this is going to do is give us an option of bundling the entire package together, the add-in, the executable, the runtime library, and any other controls that need to be there, the calendar control, for example, in this case. And I'll go ahead and package this together. So I'll go ahead and choose package. It's going to go out and figure out what the dependencies are here. I'm going to do this as a standard setup package. And I'm going to put this into, not into test1. Let's create a new folder under here. I'll just call this my setup folder. And we're being told that there are some files here that don't have any dependency information, so we need to decide whether we're going to proceed under these circumstances or not. I'm satisfied with most of these things are not going to be a problem. I don't believe I can't say that this does not have any dependencies, so I'm going to leave these blank. If I were to say that this had no dependencies, then at some point, if we were to uninstall our program, the uninstall procedure would take these libraries with us, and of course that's not correct. We want to make sure that we don't, by uninstalling, destroy your installation of ProcessBook, for example. And here's a list of all those things that need to be associated with this particular package. Now I believe, let's see, is it going to find the calendar for me? Or if the calendar control is not in here itself, we may have to go out and add that. By the way, this is where you would go out and add anything else like a README or something else that you'd like to associate with this control or with this installation. I'll go ahead and make this a single cab file. That's the installation title. Or I can say, my new software company. And this gives us an option of where we put this into the program groups. And let's see, are we finding that calendar? We still don't find the calendar here. Well, in any event, if you do need to add other things, we had that option there. This is just telling me where the install locations are going to be. This DLL is going to be in the path in which we install it, which we're showing right here. These other things are going to go into the system path. This is going to the office path. And let's see. No, I do not want this to be shared. That's the DLL. And we're all ready to go. Now what's happening is, of course, we're going the wizard is now going to go ahead and just build this for me, including all the cab files, and this is what I would then give to my users. Oh, here's the big finish to the exercise. As you can see, I have a setup directory, and in the setup directory I have a setup.exe, and I can go ahead and double click on this, and this is the type of installation you get with this package and deployment wizard. This is now installing that the proper DLLs, if any are required, and it's also going to install that. And there we go, and there's my new software company setup. It's going to go ahead and run the installation. It's going to install it into this directory, and not only will it install it, it's also going to create an uninstall. And if you've done your dependencies correctly, of course, when you uninstall it, it's not going to delete their ProcessBook object library or anything else. Of course, you should always test it. And basically, that's how we can distribute this once you've created the add-in.